You're a total freak under that. And I went and hid. I went to the roof of the library and I hid for the rest of the day until my mom came to pick me up. So that sort of thing, not helpful, and it's also street harassment, and as has been mentioned, I am a feminist and I'm kind of against that sort of thing, maybe a little bit. So there are ways of engaging that are helpful, there are ways of engaging that are harmful, and I'm hoping to engage more on the helpful side of things. And yeah, I guess that concludes the prepared part. Questions, comments, concerns, we are open.
You had a story about something that happened locally with the FBI. Can you share that story?
Oh, right. Okay, so this is another one that shows just how much of a bully you can be when you pick on a minority. The FBI had been interfacing with the Muslim community in my area, in my hometown, where I also went to university in Irvine. The mosque in Irvine was essentially built by young people for young people, was known for being progressive, was known for being open. It was full every Friday because nobody wanted to go to the tired old guy across the way. They wanted to come to this mosque and listen to someone interesting and young and fresh talking about contemporary issues and not the same old tired thing. So this mosque had a reputation for being a certain way. The FBI had been engaged in conversation with them and did an open house at the mosque and basically said, we will never put a plant at your mosque. We will always be honest with you, and in exchange, you have essentially promised us that if anything untoward happens, if you have any sort of suspicions, that you report it. And some people at the mosque didn't buy it, but most people did. Because Muslims in Irvine are pretty much upper middle class educated professionals. They got the house and the Mercedes and all that, so they're not exactly interested in bringing down America by any means. They're pretty happy where they are. I grew up there, you know, it's a nice little suburban wasteland sort of thing, where everything closes at 10 p.m. So that happened, and then not long after, a man who is something of a con man and scam artist, Corey Monty, I think that was his name, Corey Monty. He contacted the FBI and said, I think I could get some terrorists out of this mosque. Will you hire me essentially to do recon? And the FBI said yes. And he showed up at the mosque. He pretended to be a new convert to Islam. And most Muslims will reach out to converts because a lot of converts have left behind their families and their families may be against them. And so they'll reach out to them and say, you know, you're a new brother or sister in Islam and come hang out with us, come to dinner. Every single Muslim holiday that's happened at my parents' house, there's always one or two new Muslims there, just as part of the whole thing. And so it's not unusual for that to happen. So this guy pretended to be a new Muslim and made friends with this group of Egyptian-American young men, and they would play Xbox together, they'd go bowling together, they'd watch movies, doing the normal 20-something fun thing. He was really obsessed with working out, and he's like really buff, like a really big buff guy, and so he was giving them pointers, so they were becoming friends. And as soon as he felt that they trusted him, and as soon as he realized that they weren't going to say anything vaguely terroristic, he started to bait them. And he started to say things like, hey, aren't you mad about our brothers and sisters dying in Palestine? Let's go bomb something. And their response was no. That doesn't seem like a good idea. Maybe we should do a protest or write some letters or something. But eventually, he kept pushing it to the point where they went to the mosque and asked, what should we do? This guy seems like he's some sort of threat or danger. So they got in touch with Hussam Ayloush, who is, or was, I think, I'm not sure if he still is, the leader of the Council of American Islamic Relations in Southern California. And they called him, and he said, you know what? I have a direct line to the local FBI director. So I will give him a call. Hussam calls them, and he says, we think we have a potential terrorist. This guy is really scary. We don't know what's going on. And the guy at the FBI said, of course, thank you so much. We value your trust so much. I'm really glad you called. What's the guy's name? Corey Monty. Oh, don't worry about it, click. Didn't even try to pretend like he cared. Hussam was left thinking, doesn't he want more information? A phone number, an address? Perhaps details on the situation? Perhaps which mosque it was in, even? what ended up happening was one of the guys who he had befriended was unfairly prosecuted with very little evidence, and I think eventually was exonerated, but it was a lot of legal drama. It was a lot of time lost, and for him, especially because he was the father of a few young children, so he got to miss out on all of that because he was being detained and questioned and tried completely unfairly with no basis. So guess what happened in Irvine? The mosque didn't exactly appreciate the FBI anymore. So a community that was willing to work with the government, that was willing to be open, that held up their end of the bargain, the second they heard someone was trying to plot or do something untoward, they contacted the FBI. The FBI did not hold up their end of the bargain. This is how you alienate people. This is a textbook case study on how to alienate a community entirely. So a community that went from being one that was fairly open, receptive, and really felt that they were Americans and accepted, became a lot more suspicious. And it was incredibly personal for me too, because some of the people who noticed what were going on were my cousin and her friend who were on the board at the mosque. And I remember hearing something about some crazy convert terrorist guy, and I remember thinking, this is very weird. And the story got weirder and weirder. And there's an episode of This American Life about it, by the way, so they did a really good job of covering it. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Erica, because it's a perfect example of how not to do outreach, how not to build community, and how not to prevent terrorism. All right, so I guess
we handed out some cards at the beginning, so if you guys want to, you can submit either way. You can submit your cards, like pass them to the sides, or if you'd like to just raise your hand, and we can take questions that way. But the cards allow for more discreet questions if you guys
Of course.
So we have a question right here, looks like.
Hi, Heina.
Hi, Anthony. By the way, this guy started the Atheist Club at UCI. We went to school together, and he's awesome. I blame everything on him.
Yeah, it's all my fault. I'm wondering what your reaction is to other prominent apostates. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I've read works by Ibn Waraq, and then the more nutty ones, Walid Shubhat, people like that who are a little farther right-wing.
Yeah.
What your reaction is to some of those folks?
Well, part of it is that I am a Californian through and through, American born and raised, and so I can't necessarily relate to an experience of someone who lives in a Muslim majority country and had all this stuff happen to them. Part of it too is that, at least with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I read her latest book, Nomad, and she's essentially advocating for the encouragement of Muslims becoming Christians because Christianity is so much nicer. As an American, I can't really agree with that.
Yeah.
Because Christianity doesn't seem so nice to me when, there's all kinds of legislation and problems going on where people think they have the right to impose their faith on everybody else. So I have differences of opinion there. When I first came out as an ex-Muslim and I was feeling sort of new and fresh and combative, I was just gung-ho about all these people. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Ibn Waraq, they're all my heroes, right? And things have changed a bit, more than a little bit. I do think there's a role and a place in the world for various voices, of course. And given what Ayaan Hirsi Ali went through, she does have a right to be angry. She does have a right to call for certain things. But I don't necessarily agree with her on everything. And Ibn Waraq is something of a shoddy scholar, I found out, from my friend he knows 12 languages fluently, and he's looked into Ibn Waraq's work and said, stop reading that guy. He's not quite on the money with most of what he says. But like I said, this is a new thing. Being an out ex-Muslim, most people don't even know that's a thing, let alone that people like me might exist. And there's a reason for that. This is a community problem, of course, but there might be more specific questions on that. But yeah, hopefully as more and more ex-Muslims come out. Oh, there's a new one who I heard about, well not new, he's been out for a while, but he just wrote a book called The Young Atheist Handbook. His name is Alam Shaha, and he's a British Muslim, or ex-Muslim, and I read his book and I was nodding the whole time. He's kind of on the same page as I am. So as more, I guess, Western born and raised Muslims leave Islam, there's probably going to be a little more nuance in the way that the ex-Muslim question is tackled.
What was his name?
Alam Shaha, A-L-O-M, and his last name is S-H-A-H-A. And he wrote the Young Atheist Handbook, which you can buy, and I highly recommend it. It's quite lovely. Do we have any hands before I get to this number? Yes?
How have your friends and family dealt with coming out?
Well, a lot of ex-Muslims make the decision not to come out. I know a lot of ex-Muslims who are closeted, as it were, for reasons related to community and family and all that. I decided to come out because I am the world's worst deceiver and liar. I can't lie to save myself. It's almost impossible. The only way I can lie convincingly is by convincing myself of the truth of the lie, which gets me all confused, and I try not to do that. So I tried doing what every other young Muslim, not every other, of course not every other, but a lot of young Muslims will sort of do the two-faced thing, where they wear a scarf in front of mom and dad, and they pray, and then as soon as they leave the house, the scarf flies off, and they are off doing whatever. I tried doing that for about, I think it was 3 or 4 months, and I realized that I couldn't do it. Especially because I was really religious, more religious than my parents, and they were happy about that, they were proud of that. And what initially spurred my decision to come out, especially like the actual thing that made it happen, was my sister. My sister was never really so big on the whole religion thing. She didn't want to wear the headscarf, but my mom told her that she had to. She didn't force her per se, she didn't put the cloth on her head and pin it. But she let her know that, that's what you're supposed to do. And so she had told my mother at age, she was I think 16 at the time, she said, I don't want to wear that scarf anymore, I really don't. And so my mother came up to me and said, Heina, you're my good girl. Please, please convince her. Meanwhile, in my head, I was an atheist already. So I said, I can't do this anymore. And so I came out to them. And the response was, of course, at least initially, quite hostile. My parents didn't want to believe it. I told them I was an atheist, and they were like, oh, so you're having doubts. No, Mom and Dad. The doubting phase was about 2 years ago or something. And they dragged me all over California to different mosques, different imams, hoping that one might get through my stubborn brain and penetrate this horrible atheism that I had developed, like some sort of disease. We fought a lot. It happens. They didn't just see it as me leaving religion, they saw it as me denying them, denying their faith, going against the family, going against everything that they knew. Because Islam is such a way of life. It is quite a way of life, especially if you don't live in a Muslim country. And so they saw it as something of a betrayal. And it went back and forth for a while. Ugly words were said by everybody, including me. But at this point, my family and I have made our peace. We just don't talk a lot about this kind of stuff. I told them I was going to Seattle. That's all I told them. It'll eventually come out, I'm sure, especially if my book sells. But for now, it's kind of nice to not have to deal with some of the drama. I don't want to hurt them. I really don't. I hurt them a lot by doing what I did, and it wasn't necessarily my fault or theirs. In terms of friends, every single Muslim who I knew back when I was Muslim, who isn't related to me, doesn't talk to me anymore.
Do you want to talk about MSU?
I was part of the Muslim Students Union at UC Irvine, and they're somewhat notorious, or they were for a while, because they would go to events and yell at speakers and try to shut them up, and some of them got arrested, and there was all this going on. But that happened after I had left it. But while I was a part of it, I was really eager and enthusiastic. I really wanted to do things. I like doing things, clearly. And so I would volunteer for things. I was writing for the newsletter. And then, of course, I became an atheist over the summer, and I came out. And initially, some of them would email me and say things like, I know you're having doubts, sister, but just because you don't want to wear a scarf and you want to eat bacon doesn't mean you have to leave Islam. And you'll eventually come back. Which is funny because it happened the opposite way. I lived as a Muslim essentially while I was an atheist. It took me a long time to take the scarf off, to eat that piece of bacon. It took me a long time. It's not easy to overcome taboos like that. But yeah, the MSU there, but I had my differences with them even when I was a Muslim, because I thought they were focusing way too much on the attack and were not focusing on the community. And they've had to change because they were on suspension for a while. Yeah, because of what happened with the Israeli ambassador. All right, are there any hands? Yes.
Are you expecting any sort of backlash from conservative Muslims about the book being too moderate in your explanations?
I can't please everybody.
Well, yeah.
That's something I've had to, it's hard to come to terms with, but yeah, I'm never gonna please everyone. I've gotten emails from people and I've tried talking to them and they just don't want to hear me. On all sides, I've got atheists and skeptics going, you're such an apologist. What about all those women who are beaten and stoned to death? Why are you apologizing for that? And I'm not. And then I've got people saying, oh, well, you're just picking on Islam. Why not pick on Christianity? Well, I'm not an ex-Christian. How would I pick on Christianity, really, other than its intrusion into my life via legislation of various kinds? There could definitely be backlash. I mean, I know if my family, or when my family finds out, let's not engage in wishful thinking here, when they find out, they're not going to be happy. And the things I've written are not going to make everybody happy, but I'm just doing my best to try and explain American Islam mostly to Americans and see if that can lead to more understanding and more dialogue. Because I know just by being friends with certain atheists and skeptics, their views of Islam have become a lot more nuanced. And this is just doing that on a larger scale. Yes?
So being in a family which practices Muslim, do you still participate in the part of the culture, as in like celebrating Eid or having iftar?
It's a weird place to be because the Muslim holidays are definitely not as secularized as a lot of Christian holidays are. So there's still a lot more religion in the holiday, but I've slowly been backing away from that. For a couple of years I did go, Eid is one of the Muslim festivals that you mentioned. There's two Eids. There's one that marks the end of Ramadan, so it's the party, the feasting after the fasting, essentially. And then there's another one that's considered holier and more important, and that's coming up relatively soon, actually, towards the end of this month, I think. And that one is the Feast of the Sacrifice, which commemorates the story that's found in the Quran and the Old Testament about Abraham almost slaughtering his son, but then God replacing the son with a ram or a goat, depending on what you're talking about. And so Muslims will slaughter animals in commemoration. My dad's really big on it. It's his favorite holiday, and he actually goes and does the slaughter himself. I've done it. I've killed my own food before. It's kind of interesting. It's fun to bring it up. I mean, outside of the religious context, I can just go up to people and be like, yeah, I've killed my own food. But I seriously think every meat eater should. You have to have respect for what you're doing. You have to have respect for the fact that there's a living creature that you're consuming. But yeah, there's prayers in the morning on Eid. There's a morning prayer, and it's a way to see people who you're not going to see throughout the day because at least the way it works in Southern California is most extended families will pick one house where they do it, or each branch of a family will pick a house. So my dad and his brothers have one house, and then if it's not at your house, you kind of wander around to other people's houses. But some people you're never going to get to. It ends up being a really long day. So seeing people in the morning is kind of nice. You're wearing your pretty clothes and usually new jewelry, and everyone's smiling and made up, and everyone hugs each other. And I did go for a while, even as an ex-Muslim, but then I just felt really awkward about it. There's a lot of chanting at the beginning. Not participating in the prayer is not a big deal because, here's a fun fact. When a Muslim woman is menstruating, she does not have to pray. In fact, she cannot participate in the organized prayer. I mean, she can ask Allah for something, but she can't participate in the organized prayer. So me not participating, people just assumed I was menstruating, I guess, all the time. Might want to see a doctor about that. But yeah, it got odd. It got really odd, and so I stopped going to the morning prayers. But I do hang out with my family. I do engage in the cooking and the eating and the fun and the presents and all that because they're my family, and I love them, and they love me, and we have our differences, but I don't want to completely lose them. But yeah, I've definitely been backing out. Iftar is another awkward one. Iftar is the fast breaking at the end of the day during Ramadan. I've been eating. I had lunch, and they were attacking the food like they were starving because they were, in a state of ketosis at least. And so I would participate, but it did feel odd. And last Ramadan, I was out of the house at sunset more than I like to care to admit. Because I mean, I do love my family, but I wouldn't be there for iftar a lot because it just felt weird. Because they break their fast with a prayer and everything. I've been eating all day again, so I felt weird eating the food because they should have it. But yeah, other than that, there's everyday stuff too. When it's prayer time, especially Maghrib, which is the early evening prayer, when it's Maghrib time, you're supposed to, or at least in my family was always this way, you turn off your TVs and you close everything and everyone prays, and it's supposed to be a quiet, reflective time. And you know, I'm sitting there with an earbud in my ear watching King of the Hill on Netflix or something. It's weird. It feels weird. It definitely does. But we've made our peace. We've made our peace with it, I think. All right. Any other hands? Yes.
So you mentioned that your sister didn't want to wear the headscarf.
Yes.
So how did that go? And is she still a believer? Is she?
I don't know if I want to speak to that. I think
Okay, that's
I
fair
think
enough.
she can speak to for herself. But she prays and she fasts.
Okay.
So. Yes.
If there were like one thing or a few things that were the things that drove you away, or after you investigated for a certain amount of time, you were like, oh, this is the thing that really ruins some pieces of this world. What would those be?
I guess there are two phases. The first phase was things that would make me question it all, and then things that would make me leave. The first phase were a lot of the gender stuff. The gender stuff didn't drive me away completely. It just made me question and reconsider. But there's a verse of the Quran that states that men are placed a degree above women, and Muslims often will say that it's because men are supposed to be the providers or something along those lines, more of a socio-cultural, economic thing. But I always read that and sort of thought, really? I mean, my male cousins were a bunch of dumbasses, to be honest, running around, pretending to be Ninja Turtles, whereas I was sitting in the corner reading, you know, how could they be a degree above me, really? So that's the sort of thing that made me question. 9/11 made me do more research too. Some of the rules that didn't seem to have any basis in reality, especially things like dietary law, they made sense if you were living in a desert, but we don't. And some of the restrictions and things like that. But those, unlike what a lot of Muslims want to say about me, especially the ones who used to know me, it wasn't that I wanted to run around with my scarf off and eat bacon. You know, it wasn't that. But those things made me think about it and wonder about it. The things that actually drove me away were really quite philosophical. I did major in philosophy, and it was learning that almost all deistic religions that have some sort of monotheistic God especially, have very similar arguments for bolstering up their beliefs. So this idea that the universe must have come from somewhere, or there had to be a creator, look how perfectly everything works together. And those arguments, of course, we could talk about whether or not those are true, but most religions rely on them for their truth claim. And then somehow they go from that to hundreds of different religions and sects. And it didn't make sense to me how you could start with one premise and end up at a completely different conclusion to the point where you kill each other over it. That's really what made me go, wow, you know, and I was thinking about it, but I was still wearing a headscarf, identifying as Muslim. And literally one day I woke up and I said, these are atheistic thoughts. I'm becoming one of those dirty, horrible people my mom and dad told me about. There's those people that don't even believe in God. But yeah, it was real. I didn't even realize they were atheistic thoughts. I just thought they were intellectual, questioning thoughts. But eventually, yeah, it did lead me to atheism.
Once again, talking about sects, you said there are Sunni-specific or Shiite-specific practices.
Yes.
So, what are some of those examples other than the
Other than the trans thing?
Other than the trans thing.
There's a practice called mut'ah, which means temporary, and it's temporary marriage. So Islamic marriage, the word nikah, which means Islamic marriage, also means contract. It just means contract. And so you can sort of mess with the provisions of those contracts a little bit. So some Muslim women will say, if you ever lose your job and are unable to support my lifestyle, I can divorce you instantly. I know of a woman who did that. You know, I ain't saying she's a gold digger, but there are some Muslim women who put in their contract that if you decide to take another wife, it's instant grounds for divorce. Or if you turn out to not be able to have children or something like that. But the basic premises of the contract are essentially that the man has to provide financially and the wife has to be available sexually. That's kind of what it comes down to. But there's more that's added to it, of course. But Shiites have a practice called mut'a, as I mentioned, which means temporary. So they actually put a termination clause in the contract. This marriage is only valid for 30 days, or this marriage is only valid for tonight. And Sunnis will call them whores, essentially, for doing that. But it's a well-known and well-used Shiite practice. Allegedly, Muhammad said you couldn't do it anymore. It was allowed for a while, and then he said you couldn't. But Shiites say that it ain't so. And Sunnis say, of course you can't do that.
The reason, so something that brought up also was, I've heard that a man and a woman who are married and get divorced.
Right.
They cannot remarry without the woman having married somebody else in between.
That's across the board. Okay, yeah, that is true. If a Muslim man and a woman are married and they divorce, they cannot remarry without her having been married to someone else first. Not really sure why that is.
It's about him having been married to somebody else. It's just.
No, I don't think. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, don't quote me on this one, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter with the man. I think it's the woman. Which some of the more liberal-minded Muslims tell me is pro-swinging. I don't know. I don't think that's true, but yeah, that's the idea. And also, I guess since we're on the topic of divorce, if a woman is widowed or divorced, she's supposed to wait a certain, I think 3 months. It's about 3 months before she marries anyone else again, because the idea is that if she's pregnant, they want to attribute paternity to the right person. Yes.
So I had more of like two questions, but they've kind of intermingled. One
Sure.
is that, is this something that you would change or kind of regret growing up with a religion? Is there any good about it? Or, I mean, how would you say, would you rather have been without a religion, knowing what you know today? And
That's a tough one. I would say my answer depends on my mood. It's true. Right now, I'd say it was great growing up Muslim because I have a book contract now. Great. And I get to be the token brown ex-Muslim girl that they put on the speaking schedule. But I'm clearly being a little bit flip here. But it did give me a unique perspective. I joke all the time that I grew up in America's second most hated minority, and I downgraded to America's most hated minority. So what exactly do I have to be afraid of in life? Asking someone out on a date? That's nothing. Try being an ex-Muslim, then talk to me. So yeah, there's that. But then, of course, there is the, how much of my brain did I use up learning all this stuff, all the rules, all the practices, all the memorization I did? I'm losing some of it, by the way. I was trying to recall a verse and then I couldn't, and that was weird. Knowing that you forgot something, that's very weird. But, who knows? It's hard to think in hypotheticals had I not grown up Muslim. Well, what would I have grown up as if I grew up without religion? Would I be one of those smug people that runs around who doesn't have any idea what it's like to doubt yourself? Yeah, I would say that's actually the number one benefit of having grown up in a religion, having left it, is you always question. Because you change your life so dramatically, your entire view of the universe is completely changed, so you're a little, I guess, less, or at least for me, I'm a little less prone to make sweeping statements, because who knows, really. But of course people use that against me. They'll say, oh, well, you flip-flopped once, who says you won't flip-flop again? I have cousins who claim that, once you're 30 and you're not married and you don't have children, you'll change your mind and find a nice Muslim husband, but you'll get the leftovers at that point. I don't really think that's true, but yeah, it goes back and forth. Any other ones before I do? Well, I'll start with the cards here. I'll go backwards and see where. How does your family feel about your deconversion? Okay, so I kind of covered that. My mother's sad about it more than anything. She'll sometimes say to me, I don't know why you left, or I really don't want you to suffer in the afterlife, or I don't really know what to think. So it depends. Anything can be misinterpreted to support violence, but surely some things are easier or harder to use to justify violence. The Quran seems particularly easy to misinterpret this way compared to, say, Buddhist texts. That's true. There are certain texts that seem to have more in the way that could be misinterpreted.